Okay, shall I start?
Yes, sir. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Harshita. That's very kind of you to uh, give such a lucid introduction. And I welcome all the participants of this uh, event on the topic of uh, the art of writing judgment. Uh, to me, art of write. I'll start by saying that before we go on the topic of art of writing judgment, I think we should first understand the art of reading a judgment. Reading a judgment in itself is a very peculiar exercise. One needs to have a very logical bend of mind to understand what exactly judgment says and what flows from the judgment. A judgment can be 2 page long and it could be a 2000 page judgment. Uh, so, uh, Different judges have different styles of writing judgment. It depends on the person how he reads a judgment and what exactly one finds from the judgment. Of course, at the end of the day, every judgment has its own um, what follows from the judgment is a consequence, and then you have ratio and obiter. But apart from that, what makes one judgment different from another, apart from, of course, the facts of the case, is the way a judgment is presented, a judgment is written, a judgment is conveyed. Um, so, for, Before we go on the art of writing judgment, I think it is very important for us to understand and learn the art of reading a judgment. Uh, I'll just take few minutes on the reading part, and then I'll go on the writing. So when we say that we are going to read a judgment, what exactly are we looking for in a judgment? Are we looking for the facts? Are we looking for the applicable laws in the case? Are we looking for the precedent cited in the judgment? Are we looking for the ratio? Are we reading the obiter? These are the basic parts of any judgment. But a judgment becomes a precedent only when you pull out the ratio of it and apply it in another case. That is what makes a judgment significant. Otherwise, the facts of the two different cases may have two different, and more often than not, they have two different uh, facts. So, of course, you can distinguish a judgment on the basis of facts, but what makes a judgment uh, applicable to another judgment is the ratio of it. So, when we read a judgment, we must always find out the ratio. I'll come back to it later when I talk about the art of writing judgment. But so these are the basic points that we look for in a judgment. And Different judges have different styles of writing judgment. So you may find one judgment to have a lot of emphasis on philosophy, on um, I mean, one may have a lot of emphasis on philosophy, literature, and precedents set by foreign judgments, foreign courts. Other judgment may rely solely upon the first principles uh, and conclude accordingly. So there are various styles of writing judgments. What So let me go back. Let me start by citing. I'll read out certain um uh, provisions from the statute book, which talk about what a judgment is and what a decree is, and then I'll go on about explaining um, what are the ingredients of what should be the ingredients of a judgment. So the Code of Civil Procedure 1908, the old CPC, referred to judgment in section 2, subsection 9, as the statement given by a judge on the grounds of a decree or an order. The order under section 2, subsection 14, is defined as a formal expression of any decision of a civil court which is not a decree. The decree in section 2, subsection 2, means formal expression of an adjudication which, so far as regards the court expressing it, conclusively determining the rights of the parties with regard to all or any of the matters in controversy in the suit, and may be either preliminary or final. Order 20 of the CPC deals with the judgment and decree. Rule 4.1 of the provisions provides that judgment of the court of small causes need not contain more than the points of the determination and the decision thereon. So in small causes courts, I mean, I don't know how many of you are from Bombay, you will know what small causes courts are. In fact, in all the presidency courts, you have small causes courts, not in Delhi. But small causes courts need not contain more than the points of determination. So points of law and the decision. That's all is required in a judgment of a small causes court. So what we call as a metropolitan court is a small causes court. So sub rule 2, so of rule 4 under order 20 of the code provides for a judgment of other courts to contain a concise statement of the case, the points of determination, the decision thereon, and the reasons for such decisions. Rule 5 mandates that in suits in which issues have been framed, the court shall state its finding or decision with the reasons thereof upon each separate issue, unless the finding upon any one or more of the issues is sufficient for the decision of the suit. Similarly, in criminal matters, Chapter 27 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 provides for the judgment. What it says, what exactly is the judgment? Section 353 of the code requires the judgment in every trial to be pronounced in open court immediately after the termination of the trial, and or at some subsequent time, of which notice shall be given to the parties or their pleaders. The judgment as provided under section 354 is to be written in the language of the court and shall contain the points of determination and the decision thereon and the reasons for the decision. So this is the basic statutory provision that deals with judgments. Now come back to what exactly a judgment should contain. So I don't know how many of you have dealt with the superior cases, courts like the High Court or the Supreme Court. But if you read, if you pick up a volume of the SCC, Supreme Court cases, and you read, you will find that there is a chronology which is followed by almost every judge in writing a judgment. What is that chronology? I mean, maybe some parts are lacking in the lower court judgments because of the way things are dealt with at the lower court. I mean, because evidences are an intrinsic part of the lower court judgments. It is not points of facts are not argued at the Supreme Court or the High Court level. So that is what distinguishes a judgment of a lower court from the higher courts. But what basically is there in a judgment is first is index. In an ideal situation, what all will be there in a judgment is one, the index, followed by the introduction of the case. What exactly is the case about? So it's not a long description of the case, but 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of what exactly is the issue about. Then the judgment should focus on the facts of the case. What are there can be multiple. The facts can be too long, too lengthy, and there can be multiple aspects to the entire story. But the judge should, ideally, the judgment should contain what those parts of the story, those parts of the facts of the case, which are relevant to this point of contention which is raised before the court. So then the facts are enumerated. After that, the cause of action. Cause of action is a very important aspect in any judgment, in any adjudication of a dispute. Cause of action has to be there. I don't know if you guys are jotting down. I'm just giving it in chronological order. So if you guys are jotting it down, you can jot it down. That index, introduction of the case, then facts, then cause of action, and then grounds of appeal. See, one of the very important aspect of writing a judgment is that the judge ideally should take care of the fact that if it goes for a challenge in the higher courts, the lower court judgment should not look like a judgment which has been given in a not a very sound manner. So grounds of appeal have to be very clearly written under what grounds these matters are appealed or can be appealed in the further. And from there originates the issue or the point of law. It's very important because it is the point of law or the issue, legal issue, that is involved in the entire case, which determines a large part of the judgment. Facts are facts that do not that one cannot change, that do not have bearing on the case on the judge on the case in the higher forum. But when we talk about the issue or the points of law, it is I call it the most important aspect of writing a judgment. The judge must enumerate what are the points of law that are involved in the case over which the case is going to be adjudicated, or the case has been adjudicated upon, and subsequently the judgment follows from there. So, and points of law are distinct from the points of facts. The facts are facts. Point of law is the law that originates from there upon which the case is built and the judgment is delivered. Once you are done with the points of law, then comes the evidences. So judgment must contain the evidences that were led, must enumerate what are the evidences that were on record, and the appreciation of the evidences. By appreciation of the evidence, I mean the evidence must have gone through examination in chief, if you are talking about the criminal litigation and all. So it must have gone under examination in chief, even in civil matters. Examination in chief and then cross-examination. So those things need to be recorded. What all, how the evidences were appreciated by either of the, by both the parties. So are applicable. So statutory provisions that are, so suppose a case where one is dealing with murder. So what are the laws that are applicable? So the laws, obviously, then the judge will have to talk about 302 and what is there in 302, 300. In fact, it will start with 300, 302 comes later. So 300, what degree of murder was there, and how which law is applicable. So all these things need to be mentioned properly, so that statutory provisions come thereafter. After that, another important thing is the judgments that are applicable in the present case, what we call as precedents. So if there are precedents which support or which strengthen the outcome of the judgment or the reasoning of the judge should ideally include all those judgments applicable over there. Then comes the judge's reasoning and finding, which is the most important aspect of it. One has to understand that at the end of the day, the judge is delivering a public, it's a public act. Delivering a judgment is a public act. It's a public function that the judge is delivering. So in that situation, the reasoning of the judge and the way the judge appreciates the case becomes very important, and that is where a judge's um, integrity, a judge's knowledge of law, a judge's appreciation of evidence, a judge's uh, outlook towards the case or towards the entire issue is reflected. So that is where the judge gives the reasoning and the finding, and it should be very, very clear, unbiased, and in no uncertain terms. After the judge reasoning and finding of the judge, what follows is the consequential action. What are the consequences of the judgment that the judge must uh, write down over there? That there should be. So suppose if there is the case is relating to murder. So after all this, the judge's reasoning and finding, the consequence of which is the sentencing part or the punishment part, that is what is called the consequential action. And then the conclusion, a judge may write after the consequential action. So that is the chronology in which a judgment has to be written. I'll repeat it again for for refreshing it. It should contain the index, introduction of the case, cause of facts, cause of action, grounds of appeal, issues or the points of law, evidences led, appreciation of evidence, applicability of law, which is statutory application, then applicable judgments, if any, reasoning and finding of the judge, consequential actions, and conclusion. So these are the points that one has to take care of while writing a judgment. And then I'll come back to some real life examples now. This is very theoretical that I talked about. Now I'll come back to some real life examples where I had the opportunity to read some of the very fascinating judgments. Mostly because my practice has mostly been in and around the Supreme Court. So I got to read a lot of judgments from the Supreme Court in the last 3-4 years. And one of the most fascinating things was the judgments written by retired Justice Deepak Mishra. Justice Mishra was a student of literature, and that reflected in his judgments. So Justice Mishra would start his judgments with stories or with lines from probably Shakespeare or Wordsworth's writings. But what was very interesting is that those instances which he would quote in the judgment would actually apply on the case. So it is not that he would just write something and which had no connection to the case, but because he was a student of literature and he understood the underlying issues, he would use those lines, those words from literature to reflect upon the judgment. So this was one. Similarly, Justice Markandeya Katju used to write Urdu couplets and Persian couplets, which would reflect on the issue and the way he would write the judgment. One of the very important things that I came across was reading judgment of Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, who is presently serving the Supreme Court. His judgments are a delight to read for any student of jurisprudence. If you are a jurisprudence, if you have interest in jurisprudence, you would love reading his judgment. His analysis and application of American jurisprudence, especially in the Indian law, is impeccable. So that reflects in his judgment. But that does not take away the fact that his judge, despite the literature part being imbibed in the judgment by Justice Mishra, or the American jurisprudence being imbibed by Justice Chandrachud in their judgments, in their respective judgments, they did not take away the essence of the judgment. The essence of the judgment, again, I would go back to what I explained a while ago, uh, remained the same. Um, their reasoning on coming to a conclusion of any judgment, their findings would be perfectly on the point. The laws, the issues that they framed were absolutely um, to the point, and would and their judgments would, and all the judges, I'm just naming a couple of them because I got to practice before them and I got to read their judgments very often. But all the judges, they write so impeccably well and so beautifully their judgments that it's very difficult to find any flaw in them. uh, my personal opinion is that on the issue of writing judgment, that the judgment should be short, uh, it should be precise, and it should contain the basics of all the ingredients that I just discussed. But it should not contain a lot of maybe preaching. Of late, the courts have gone into preaching mode, and with all due respect to the courts, I mean, of course, the courts are the show us, um, guide us to the right direction. They guide us through law and constitutional values. But I think the judgment should be less preachy, and I'm not saying that the judgments are preachy, but the judgments, if they are preachy, I mean, they should not be like that. The judgment should be a judgment. It should be facts and appreciation of law, appreciation of evidences, and the reasoning of the judge. That's it. Um, I think the preaching part can be taken care of by the society, the parliament, politicians, and all. So that is what my whole idea of writing a judgment is. If you have any questions, you may kindly shoot me now. Yeah.
So we have a question from Simi Varghese. She writes, is it not mandatory to provide for the maintainability, and what about the limitation? Should that be mentioned initially itself in the opening of the judgment?
It's not necessary, but maintainability is, of course, when I say that cause of action, it includes the maintainability of and issues and points of, so two parts: cause of action and issues and points of law. Of course, that would contain the maintainability. But when I but if it is well within the limitation, I don't think it is very important to mention the limitation part. I may be inadequately trained in that because of my practice that revolved mostly around the Supreme Court, in and around the Supreme Court. But as far as my knowledge goes and my understanding has been, limitation, I mean, if you want to add, you can add, and but ठीक है, I've seen orders, I've seen judgments where my limitation, because if there is no issue on the limitation part, I don't think that is there to be considered.
There's no more questions in the chat box. To the participants, if you want to ask questions, kindly unmute yourself or type it in the chat box. I think we don't have any questions as of now.
Okay, so I'll give, yeah, somebody is asking a question. Okay, so certain judgments that I would flag that every student should read is you must read judgments by Justice Vivian Bose. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant judgments. Justice Hidayatullah, he wrote amazing judgments. For the students of income tax, I think you should read McDowell, the McDowell judgment by Justice Chinnappa Reddy. Amazing judgment, and the way he has reproduced uh, the British jurisprudence into the taxation laws in India, it's a piece of delight to read. This is McDowell judgment by, I think it is 1973 or 1974 by Justice Chinnappa Reddy. Amongst the new ones, I would say if you want to read on something on social justice and on the equity given to persons with disability, and I'm mentioning this with the disclaimer that I was one of the advocates appearing in that case. This judgment was given by Justice Arun Mishra, who recently retired. It's a beautiful judgment on on a person with progressive disability taking admission into a medical school. Um, it's the judgment is Purswani Asutosh versus Union of India. It is, I think, 2018 or 2019 judgment. Um, if you can find out, just go and read Purswani Asutosh versus Union of India, Justice Mishra's judgment. Beautiful judgment. For the tax, I told you about McDowell case and the judgment by Chinnappa Reddy. Of course, all of you must have read or must be reading Keshwananda Bharti, absolutely brilliant judgment. I need not say that you should read it. Of others, I think you should read Minerva Mills. You should read R.C. Cooper. Very amazing judgment. Constitutional law judgments, by and large, are very fancy, very interesting. But amongst the other judgments that you should read, which are not constitutional law judgments, are one I just told you about Chinnappa Reddy's McDowell judgment and Justice Mishra's Purswani Asutosh judgment. One judgment I would, irrespective of whether you are in favor of the judgment or against the judgment, one judgment you should read is the Ram Janmabhoomi judgment, which was recently delivered in 2019. It's the citation is very peculiar, 2021 SCC 1. So you should read that, and irrespective of the fact that whether you are in agreement with the judgment or against the judgment, you should read basically for the way the judgment is written. It contains every single aspect that a judgment should have, from index to conclusion. It is so well fragmented and discussed. The evidences have so well been appreciated that it's a piece of delight to read. So yeah, any other question?
Yes, sir. We have a few questions in the chat box. So, can we conclude that in all we have to write the summary of a judgment or the entire case?
Sorry?
There's a question. There's a question. We have to, in short, write a whole summary in a judgment.
Yeah. So when you write the facts of the case, you write the summary of the write the summary of the case. So facts of the because facts of the case can be very elaborate, and it could go into tens of pages or dozens of pages. So what ideally the judges do is that they summarize the facts, or what they do is that they would pick up only those parts of the facts which are applicable to the present dispute, or the points of law that need to be covered. So that way. But in criminal law, and especially at the trial level, I think the facts play a very, very important role, and that is where you will have to reproduce the contents of FIR and the charge sheet in a very elaborate manner, so that the same is appreciated while the reasoning and the findings are written by the judge. So I have seen judgments of trial court running into 5,000 pages. The Gujarat riots case, if you read those files, you will see that the trial court judgments run into more than 5,000 pages. So that's how it is. In the Ram Janmabhoomi case, although the Supreme Court's judgment was just in 1050, 1045 pages, but the High Court's judgment ran into 8,200 pages. So that's how it is. So when the dispute is, I mean, the nature of the dispute is so serious, and every aspect of the disputes needs deliberation and argument and appreciation of evidence, then of course you will have to reproduce all those facts.
There's another question, sir. Does legal magazines makes the judgment attractive?
Oh, yes, they do. They are not important, but yes, they do. They do make the judgments attractive. It's individual judges' prerogative whether to use the legal maxims or not, but they do make the judgments attractive. At the end of the day, what is a judge? I mean, how do we lawyers differentiate ourselves from the what, if I could use the term, common man? Is the way we read the judgment, the way we understand the judgment. So if everything is so clear, precise, and so simple, I think a common man would be able to, a common man, common woman would be able to read it and understand everything. Then you would not be needing lawyers. It's the way the things are written, and it's the way legal language is. I think that is what makes lawyers appreciate the judgment more than the uh, common man.
Sir, can you advise the students on how can we create our interest in reading long judgments? It's a great task for us.
See, there is no there is no shortcut to creating interest. I mean, you will have to read it. I mean, when I was in college, I was in Delhi University for my LLB, and the unique style of teaching in Delhi University is that they give you case materials where your entire course is designed around the judgments uh, in every subject. So you have no other option but to read the judgments. And I think that is where we started reading the judgments in totality, and from where our interest in judgment writing. And of course, I mean, if you start reading judgments of judges, great judges like Patanjali Shastri, or or Justice Mahajan, or Justice Vivian Bose, absolutely fantastic judgments. And criminal, in especially criminal law judgments, are very, very interesting. Trust me, I practice tax law a lot, direct taxes, but income tax judgments are very, very boring. Uh, when I was in college, I never liked taxation, merely because of the way the judgments would be written, or the statute would be too heavy to carry. But that is how it is. But then you will have to develop this interest if you want to get into serious litigation practice, or even if you want to get into a firm practice. I think judgment reading is compulsory. One must read one judgment almost on a daily basis. You guys are I don't know how many of you are students, but if you are students, you have ample time to read a judgment. It will not only help you develop the practice of reading judgment, but also help you understand the law from a very, very interesting perspective of the judges, perspective of the arguing counsel, perspective of the opposing counsel, which is very important for any person interested in litigation. So make it a habit. I mean, you start with the judgments written by great judges, which are interesting. Especially the criminal law judgments are very interesting to read. Um, you start with them, and then subsequently, on constitutional law, of course, there can be no match to the constitutional law judgments written by the great judges, 5 judge, 7 judge, 13 judge benches. So you should start reading that. There is no shortcut. There is no quick pill that I can prescribe that will help you develop interest in reading judgments. It's a process. It's a tedious process. You will have to do it. There's no other option.
There's another question. So, any guide on any good books for the law students, or how which are good reading materials for law students?
I don't know. I mean, this is this is a very open-ended question. A very I don't know. What exactly are you asking for? Good books to read on which subject, or randomly on law? If you are asking me for a book on law that everyone should read, I think it is Glenville Williams' Learning the Law, that orange colored book. Yeah. So I mean, if you want to take this down, you must a book called Learning the Law by Glenville Williams. It's published by Sweeten Maxwell, um, and it's an absolutely brilliant book to read. There are other books also, but I don't know if they are available in India or not. One is Brief to Counsel. Uh, yeah, Brief to Counsel is another book which is very interesting. But I think every law student, every college-going law student must read uh, the book Learning the Law uh, by Glenville Williams.
So, there's another question. How relevant is it to cite foreign judgments?
Well, they do not have binding value on any judgment, but they do have persuasive values. And I think our culture has been to adopt the best practices from wherever we get it. And that is the strength that Indian culture has. We have adopted the best of the practices from across the world and evolved ourselves. So I think there should be no problem in citing foreign judgments which are relevant, which are sound on law, and which serve the purpose of justice. So I see personally, if I were a judge, I would certainly cite the foreign judgments. I mean, again, I'll give the example of McDowell judgment by Justice Sinappa Reddy, where he cited British court judgment, which was beautiful, and it in fact settled the law on uh, on 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 colorable exercise in tax matters. And it was a British court judgment, and it was a Westminster, and how the Westminster how the House of Lords and has dealt with the issue of colorable legislation and colorable exercise in taxation, that he reproduced in the judgment. It's beautiful. I mean, I don't know if I have it here, but if I had it in front of my screen, I would have read it out. It's a beautiful piece of foreign judgment reproduction in an Indian judgment. Yeah.
So,
McDowell.
how to make a judgment look attractive?
Sorry, how to make a judgment look attractive? You don't have to make a judgment look attractive. You have to make a judgment look sound. You have to make a judgment look sound on the principles of law, and you have to make sure that your judgment just does justice to the case. um, I think that is that what is the end product that we are looking for in any judgment. We are not looking for the language. We are not looking for the mode of the way it has been written. We are not looking for how which judgments have been cited and which foreign jurisdiction have been invoked into writing any judgment. The end product, the end expectation of any judgment is whether the judgment does justice to the case or not. And I think that should be kept in mind while writing any judgment. Of course, the style is important. The chronology in which the judgment has to be written is important, because that is how because you have to make it look sequential. It should not be that your conclusion is coming first and your reasoning is coming later, and then your facts of the case is coming in somewhere in between. No, of course, you cannot afford to do that. The chronology is important, but the most important part is that the judgment should do justice. So I think it is not important to get into whether how to make a judgment look attractive. I think judgments are meant for doing justice.
Okay, so there are no more questions. So participants, if you want to ask any more questions, kindly unmute yourself and ask the questions. Okay, so there's one more question. Do judgments have to be written in paragraphs or can be written in any form?
No, they have to be in paragraphs. It's very important to write them in paragraphs. So only then, because uh, uh, what else? How else can you write it? I mean, you can write it in a story format, but then it would be very difficult to segregate various parts of the judgments. I told you there are I enumerated around 12 parts of any judgment. So then you will not be able to segregate it. It's very important, because only then a counsel who is arguing a case and using that judgment to argue his case would be able to locate the points of law or the evidences or whatever point that he wants to argue properly. So I think making the judgment, writing the judgment in a paragraph format is very important, because that is how you will be able to um, do justice to the format of the judgment. Because uh, again, you have to write it in a sequential manner. You have to uh, cater to every part of judgment, including facts and issues and evidences and applicability of statutes. So they cannot be in a story format. Of course, they have to be in paragraphs. And that is how, because when we argue in the Supreme Court, we always say that, okay, this is the judgment. Suppose 2021 SEC 1, paragraph 749, and the judge immediately goes to paragraph 749, because that is how it is written, and that is what is it should be written.
So what are the essentials of a judgment? Kindly please explain in pointers.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
What are the essentials of the judgment?
Okay, so
Kindly
essential
please
of the
explain in
judgment.
pointers.
I'll again because I have already talked about them. I'll again enumerate them. One is the index, then is the introduction of the case, and the facts of the case, cause of action, grounds of appeal, issues and points of law, evidences led, appreciation of evidence by both sides, then the applicability of statutes, then applicable judgments like precedents, if any, then reasoning and finding of the judge, which will include the ratio and all, and then consequential action, and then the conclusion. So these is the chronology in which a judgment has to be written, and these are the essentials of the judgment.
Okay, thank you, sir. There are no more questions. So anything else that you would like to add to the session?
No, I think I've spoken a lot, and I've given a lot, but I would love to see answer any question if anyone has, or any, apart from judgment writing, if you have any other question relating to law or courts or Supreme Court especially, I would love to answer that. I mean, if you have time, I can take a couple of more questions and before I sign off.
Yes, sir, we have time. Participants, if you have any queries, kindly unmute yourself and ask questions.
May I? Hello.
Sure, you
Yes,
can ask.
Akshata, yes, please.
Yes. So actually, I liked how you talked about judgment for tax laws. So, being in metropolitan city, if you want to practice for tax, can you give guidance or anything? Because I'm from first year to second year student right now. So I'm looking forward to to know about more laws, like wherein I can know my interest area. So if you could guide anything on tax or IPR, something that way.
Okay, so it so happens that both these subjects are very dear to me. One, in the sense that I read intellectual property law for my master's in London, wrote my thesis on it, but I mostly practice tax law in India. So direct taxes, income tax. So I the tragedy has been that while I studied intellectual property law abroad, when I came back to India, I could not practice intellectual property law for a couple of years, precisely because I was working with the Chamber of the Additional Solicitor General of India, where we were representing the government, and most of the cases that we argued were tax laws. So in now I have got into the firm practice, and in the firm we have intellectual property laws a lot to deal with. But if you want to start with tax practice, I think it's always advisable to join a tax firm, um, because of the kind of grounding that they would give you in the subject. Um I could do tax matters. I still think that it would have been better if I had started with a tax firm. But because I started with the government, with the government side practice in the office of the Additional Solicitor General, there were numerous, a lot many cases which I got to handle and argue and make notes of. But these were very superficial in the sense that all the work was done by the firms or the briefing councils or the department. Um, you only have to go and argue the case. I think when you join a tax firm, you do the basics. In tax, what is important is that you do the basics. In fact, in intellectual property law also, you must know the filing procedure, the waiting time, and how to deal with the registry in the uh, trademark registry or the patent registry and all these places, which will give you a grounding into the law and the procedure. Of course, later when you are doing a counsel practice, you can choose to ignore all these parts and just argue the matter on the appellate side. But it's always advisable to work with a firm if you are if you want to work on the intellectual property or on the income tax side. Work with a firm which has exclusive tax or IPR practice. They will give you a good grounding into law. They will train you very well. And then you can go on your independent practice if you build a good clientele.
Okay, thank you.
So we have another question. Best resources online to read judgments for those who cannot afford Manupatra and SSC membership.
This is a very tough question. See, personally, I like SEC a lot because it's very easy to access. It's very easy to read. The only problem with SEC is that it's expensive. Manu Patra is also good, but let me ask my associate what he prefers. What do you think? What
I think you're asking
apart from Manu Patra and SEC, what do you think?
So to be very honest, I think it's just go directly download the judgment. Or
when
you're doing a search, I think
Indian Kanun
you can
See,
go to, but again, Indian Kanun is like Wikipedia. You can edit the judgment. It's not very reliable.
Indian Kanun you can read, but it's not very reliable. So that is a problem. It's not properly paragraphed. So that is where the problem lies. So I think but most of the colleges these days provide for Manupatra or SEC subscription to their students. So that is the thing. But where else can you read it? I mean, you can download these judgments. They are available. In fact, very many good judgments are always available online. You can download them from.
You can search for judgments on Indian Kanun, look at the diary number, go to the.
See, my junior colleague just told me that you can actually go to Indian Kanun check the citation of the judgment, use that citation, and go to the respective High Court or the Supreme Court website and find it out and pull a PDF copy from there. It's easy. So yeah, all the famous reportable judgments are there on the High Court and Supreme Court website. So you can actually see, it will require a basic practice of going on the Indian Qanun and pulling out, just checking the proper citation, the year, the diary number, and all those things. And then go back, or whatever the number is, red petition number or SLP number or whatever, and then go back to the Supreme Court website or the High Court website and look for those and pull it out. But SCC gives you a very, very good, I'm not advertising SCC, but I find SCC very easy to use.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? Okay, so there's another question. With this growth in technology, soon we'll be storing confidential information of our clients on it, but hackers can access it. So it will be a threat to us.
I didn't get that.
The question is, with this growth in the technology, we'll be soon storing our confidential information of the clients on our devices. So the hackers can access it. So it will be a threat to us as lawyers. So
Yeah,
basically for data protection, I think.
yeah, but then what is the solution? I don't think the solution lies with the lawyers. I don't think the solution lies with the judges. The solution lies with the tech companies. The solution lies with the devices that you use and the services that you use. Of course, there is a good chance of getting data hacked, even if you store it on cloud and elsewhere. But then what can you do? I don't have an answer for this. I don't know. In fact, I am looking for an answer that if my data, which I mostly store on cloud, if that gets compromised with, what do I do? Who do I go to? Of course, I can sue Google or Microsoft, because our firm mostly uses the Microsoft platform for all the office purposes and storing data and everything. But if they get lost, of course, I'll go and sue Microsoft and do this and that, but that's a later part. But then the confidentiality has been breached. What do I do? So yeah, I don't know. I'm relying on the technology and the words given by people from the tech side that, okay, your data would not be lost. Use this technology, use this software, use this antivirus or whatever, anti-malware, or all those things. But then there is a danger. There is a danger always. But what can you do? I am a very old school lawyer, so I still print my all the information that I get on email or whatever on the case. I print them and then read it. I cannot read on the screen for more than 5-10 minutes. So I prefer everything hard in hard copy. I write my own notes for the case. If I have to argue a case, I will write it with my pen and paper, and then go and argue. I'm also trained in a law chamber, Mr. Banerjee's chamber, which is, of course, which is used to be an old school chamber. Now with this COVID and everything, things have changed, and we have shifted to technology. But I continue to be old school, and I still have copies of my SCC which I pull out and read instead of going on the website and reading it on the SCC portal. I still prefer reading it from the book. But then this cannot, with the changing times, technology is taking precedence. And I think the technology has to be robust enough to provide security, digital security to lawyers and to everyone. But I don't have an answer. What do I do? If there is a breach, there is a breach. I can't do anything except for suing the Microsoft or Google or whatever.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? I think there are no more questions. So, concluding this, on behalf of Team Law Internship, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Shubhendu Anand sir for taking out time from his busy schedule and interacting with our young minds. It was truly an enriching session, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.